Abortion is the thing that is so painful for a lot of people that we don't want to bring it up. Number one, we don't want to offend people. Number two, it's politicized. But number three, many of us feel a guilt and a shame that we have not yet been able to deal with through the blood of Christ. So you have this congregation, and in the Black community, it's even higher, obviously, because of the numbers, where so many people are what we would call post-abortive. They're dealing with this in some respect. But as we walk through Scripture, the issue of life, the issue of justice, the issue of love and compassion and forgiveness are all things that we should be preaching about from the pulpit. And so people, especially in churches, need to be equipped with how to address the issue in their own lives and also in the lives of other people around them.
Benjamin Watson, welcome to the Happy Hour.
Great to be with you. Excited.
I'm happy you're here. I need to go and figure out how many dynamic duos we've had on the show, because your wife's already been here. We've already had our happy hour, and now you're here. And I'm so excited to have, her other half. Your better half has already been here.
Yeah, my better half. I'm just here to support her, honestly. Like, I'm letting her pave the way for me, and so I am grateful that she came on the show and that she didn't say she left a good impression, and so that you felt okay allowing her second half to be with you.
She paved the way for you, and I'm so happy. Benjamin, we met in January at a conference that you and I both were attending called Stand for Life, a pro-life conference. And I knew after watching one of your breakouts that you did with Lecrae and some other friends, I was like, I got to have you to come talk on. And then you're like, well, let me tell you, I got a book coming out. And so I'm so excited. Before we jump in, I want you to introduce yourself to my listeners.
Oh, wow. I'm Benjamin Watson. I love to say I'm a servant of the Most High God. But on this earth, I am husband to Kirsten Watson, going on 18 years in July. I can't believe
Congrats,
it.
Guys.
Yes, yeah. She put up with me for that long. And then I'm also a father of 7 kids. Pray for us. Send donations to us. We'll take all the above.
Are your last 2 in preschool? Is that what I just realized?
They just turned 4.
Okay.
And so they will be going to pre-K next year.
Okay.
And so we actually took them to the school about 2 weeks ago for kind of like a tryout day. And we held our breath. And then when we came to pick them up, they were crying, but they were crying because they loved it so much.
That's a good sign.
That was a good sign. And so hopefully they'll be accepted. I already have 5 other kids that go to the school. They already are taking all of my money anyway, so they may as well
just give them everything you have.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, my listeners will care about this. You used to play a sport that I love.
Yeah, I did. Well, I didn't know. I know your listeners are some amazing people. I played a little football. Played in the NFL for 16 years. I started at university. Actually, I started at Duke University and transferred to University.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, okay. That's another podcast. It's amazing.
There it is.
And played at the University of Georgia. Go Dogs! Back-to-back national champs the last 2 years. Got to put that out there. And
the only thing I have to say about that, Benjamin, is that 1 year that Texas beat y'all in what was it, 2018, 2017? It was a while ago.
Look, I don't even remember that.
Oh, you blocked it out of your memory?
No, I just don't remember. No, I do remember that.
The 2019 Sugar Bowl.
No, y'all killed us. You know why I know? Because I was playing for the New Orleans Saints at that time, and I went to the game, and I was standing on the sideline. This is how I knew it was going to be bad for Georgia that day. And I love my Dogs, 100%. I stayed there till the end, on the sideline with the guys. I'm red and black through and through. But I knew it was going to be a bad day when the Longhorn almost ate the Bulldogs.
That is my favorite thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
When I saw that, I already knew it was going to be bad for the Dogs, and it was going to be a long day for us, and it was. So, that was a bad day for us.
It's the only thing I can bring to the table because you guys have had an amazing couple of years. And, it's that it's that moment. I'll give you an example of what that was like. This last fall, I took 2 of my boys to Texas Tech University for a preview.
Mhm.
And I was praying the whole time, please let none of my children end up at Texas Tech. Go Red Raiders. It is what it is. But
unless
I just
unless
really
they
didn't want any of
unless they're paying for it. Unless Texas Tech is
unless
gonna
they're
pay
paying for it, then go
for it.
wherever they want.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. But when we were there in Lubbock, just a couple of weeks earlier, Texas had lost at Tech, and my
Yeah.
boy Bijan had fumbled that ball and all the
Yeah.
things. I'm telling you, when we were in the assembly at Texas Tech, they played that clip of them beating us like on repeat a million times, and I had to sit through the whole thing. I was like, so all that to say, I understand what it feels like when you get that one moment, you just want to bring it up. And so that's what I brought it up for you. Okay, you played at
I'm
University of
not
Georgia.
mad at
Go
you.
Dogs. I can cheer
Yep.
for you
Go
guys.
Dogs.
Go Dogs. And
Thank
then
you.
you ended
Thank you.
up at a couple different teams.
Yep. Yep. I drafted in 2004 to the New England Patriots, and I played there for 6 years. After leaving there, we went around the country. We went to Cleveland for a little bit, went to New Orleans, went to Baltimore for a little bit, and ended up back my 16th year. In 2019 was my last year. My last game was in January of 2020. We lost to the Tennessee Titans in the playoffs. My last game. I cried the whole way off the field. Ended up back in New England for that 1 year. So I kind of completed the circle.
Oh, that's good. I didn't know that. Did
Yeah.
you know going into that game that if you lost, it would be like the end of that kind of era thing? Is that what the emotions were there? You knew it was that?
Yeah, I knew. I knew.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, it should have been the end. I mean, you had Kirsten on the pod a while ago. She would have told you I should have been done like a decade before that.
I think she
She
kind of
probably
mentioned it, but
and she definitely was right. But I knew. I mean, the body can take but so much, and it's a young man's game, as they say. I was 39 in my last game, and I knew that it was just time to figure out what we were going to do, where we were going to
yeah.
live long term.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to a point where you're moving around at that stage of my career, and it's a year here, a year there. And we always stayed together. We moved our entire family wherever we went.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't want to be
Mm-hmm.
apart. And when the kids look at you and say, "I want to make friends, but
Yeah.
I can't because I know we're going to move," then
Right.
that means it's time to do the best you can to stay. And
Mm-hmm.
I poured out everything. I was done. That's why the
16
emotions were
years is
there.
a long time. I mean, isn't the average like 2 or something for in the
Yeah,
NFL? I mean,
it's
it's
like three and a
low.
half. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
the guys that the names they've been in
Right.
the league for a long time. But when you look at the numbers and the averages, I mean, it's about 3.5 years. So
Yeah.
I was fortunate. I was also very stubborn. Had a whole lot of injuries that I'm dealing with, but it was part of my journey.
Well, I love that. And so I'm gonna ask you the same way I asked your bride questions at the end of her episode. I'm gonna ask you a couple of football questions at the end, but I want to talk about this book. And Benjamin, I met you at the Stand for Life conference, and I don't know if I was able to tell you this, but when Lauren reached out to me about coming to this conference and being a part of it, I said, "Hey, I'd love to be a part of this. I think, can I have a conversation with Elizabeth about this?" And these are mutual friends of ours that run this
Mm.
conference. And I wanted to have a conversation with Elizabeth because I just wanted to say, hey, I'm 100% pro life. There's not anything in me that is not pro life. I said, but the language of pro life has been hard in the last couple of years. And it seems to be really associated with a political party instead of like a faith ideology about human life.
Mm.
And I told her, I said, I'm really concerned about other aspects of pro-life. Like I'm concerned for those who are incarcerated. I'm concerned for the mother on the other side of the tracks that is just can't get it together. And she's like, you're in the right spot. And so I was like, I felt comfortable going because that's where I kind of come from. And I read your book, and the book is called The New Fight for Life, and it comes out this summer. Roe, Race, and a Pro-Life Commitment to Justice. And I want to ask you a couple questions about it. But first, I just want to say, you just told us this history. You're a dad. You've got 7 kids, played in the NFL for 16 years. How does someone like you get into the conversation of pro-life?
Well, partly because I felt exactly like you. I felt like where's the nuance? Where's the
Mm-hmm.
holism when it comes to the issue of life? As a believer, I believe that people are created in the image of God. I believe in human dignity. I believe that from womb to tomb, human beings have value, whether you agree with them or not, whether they vote Democrat or Republican, whether they are rich or poor, whatever their ethnicity is, whatever things they struggle with. I believe that humans in general have value, no matter their stage of development. And much of the pro-life conversation from a political aspect, you're right, and from a culture war aspect, has been largely focused on saving preborn babies, which is vitally important, which is worth standing on the hills. It is. It's something that we should all care about. But there seems to be a vacuum when it comes to the rest of the life. And I think that there are a lot of people that feel, quite frankly, caught in the middle. They don't feel like politically they're that far on the right. They don't feel politically that far on the left, but they do care about people, and they care about human thriving and human flourishing. And so for us, it was kind of a weird baptism into quote unquote pro-life advocacy. When we had our first child, Grace is 14 years old now. And I remember we went and got a 3D 4D ultrasound. This is back in 2009 or 2008. She was born in January 2009. And I remember sitting next to Kirsten and looking at the screen, and the technician was rubbing over the stuff on her belly. And I saw Grace on the screen, and she yawned, and I yawned. Like, I caught the yawn from the baby in utero. Crazy. And we left that place, and Kirsten said, one day I would love to provide this service for other women. I don't know what that looks like, but just be able to see, the baby in utero with this type of an ultrasound. Well, fast forward a decade, we then partnered up with a couple of organizations, and we started purchasing ultrasounds in places where we live. So we placed one at a pregnancy resource center in Baltimore. We did one in New Orleans, and one in my hometown, and one in Georgia now. And Baltimore, all these different places. And when you're playing in the NFL and you do something like that, I guess it's newsworthy.
People take notice. Yep.
Yeah. And so that's kind of how we got kind of involved. And again, we never woke up one day and said, we want to be pro-life, or we want to, stomp the pavement and march and all that type of stuff. That wasn't our goal. Our goal was simply to elevate and love life at its earlier stages, but also how that coincides with some of the work that we've done throughout my career with people from all backgrounds that were suffering from other things. You mentioned incarceration. I mean, there's so many life issues, and we believe that there's this web of life and this web of justice that all of us can be involved in.
Yeah, I love that. I had Trinae McGee. Do you know her? Or okay,
I know her. That's little sis. I will chop your hand off if you come too close to little sis. I will protect her. She is a jewel. I'm glad you had her on.
It was a joy to talk with her, and I met her at the same conference I was at. She was on in April, and people, if they're listening, they can't see you, that you're a Black man, and Trinae's a Black woman, and for so often, you talk in your book, what I thought was really important, I think it's good to talk about, is you talk about the history behind many Black women, and then you even talk about Black churches and Black pastors, the history behind that conversation of wanting to scream and say, this is, my body, my choice. And I think that a lot of people, if they're not understanding the history behind where this is coming from, it can get confusing, I think, from the people listening. And I don't want to speak out of turn. I think it can be confusing for the women of like, where do I stand on this? Like, because there has been history in our country of Black women's bodies being taken advantage of. So can you talk a little bit about this? Trinae talked about how, the abortion industry is really, it is disproportionately Black mothers who are having abortions. And so we all have to kind of go, what is this? Like, another conversation that we're having on the happy hour this month is, why are our prison systems disproportionately Black men when it's not the major? Yeah. So we're having these conversations, but can we talk a little bit about, you talk about that with women in general. You also talk about with the Black church as well. And you make a bold statement. Let me get there. Hold tight. Here we go. You said, when it comes to abortion, I'm convinced that Black believers in America are uniquely positioned to be the conscience of this nation.
Yeah.
And that made me stop in my tracks. And so I want to know why you believe that and some of the history behind how we got here.
Oh, wow. That's a lot there, but it's so good. I'm glad you're having these conversations. I'm glad you're doing it with authenticity and with grace, because it's important, and you have a trusted voice to make people think. I'll start with the last part when I talk about being the conscience of the nation. And when we look at issues of civil rights specifically, and I believe that abortion is a civil rights issue, when you talk about defending vulnerable people and people who have been taken advantage of, the Black church specifically has been a voice of conscience and reason in this country. even if we need to look no further than the civil rights movement of the 60s, or we need to look no further than emancipation, when it was a black pastor who said, hey, my people need 40 acres and a mule, and they need land to be able to till and to be able to have a living. That came from the black church. And so the black church has this legacy of understanding what it means to be taken advantage of in this present world, but also understanding that we have hope and glory and hope in Christ, but the scripture calls us to live lives of justice and calls us to live lives in which we take our faith and put feet on it and use that faith in order to correct injustice in this present age. And that's been the legacy of the black church. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely than their white counterparts to have abortions. It is estimated that black women account for over 50% of the abortions, although we make up 13% of the population.
Right.
And so part of the reason in even writing this book, Jamie, was I got tired of hearing that stat over and over again, and no one ever being bold enough or educated enough or loving enough to ask why. Why is that the case? Because honestly, there's only two reasons. Number one, you could either say that black mothers and fathers enjoy or are more open to killing their preborn children than other ethnicities. And that's okay if you want to say that, but you got to say it. The other side of that coin is, what are the economic, educational, cultural, societal, systemic factors that perhaps make this demographic more vulnerable and targeted when it comes to abortion? And so what I tried to do in the book was unpack that. Yeah. And you mentioned the My Body, My Choice, which, from a scientific standpoint, we can debunk that mantra. But even in speaking to so many black women who have had abortions, some of the same people that you've spoken to and rubbed shoulders with at that conference at Stand for Life would say that part of the attraction of that statement is that women in general have not had autonomy or agency, not just in this country, but in general. And as believers, we understand why. We can go back to the garden and see where a man threw his woman under the bus when God came looking for him in the garden, and he said, it was that woman you gave me. And so we understand how that stuff trickles down. But then specifically as black women in this country who initially had value on this land for their ability to reproduce, and then were taken advantage of by those who were oppressing them, when you talk about rape and those sorts of things. And then you fast forward to today, all the different instances that we've seen of black women being either not listened to, being disregarded, or perhaps the fact that they make 58 cents on the dollar for the same job, even though they're more educated. All these sorts of things roll into one. And you see women saying, especially black women saying, I want to be able to control something because everything seems to be taken away from me.
Right. You talk about in here, you tell a story about, and I don't remember what page it was on, so I can't find it, but you tell a story towards the end about, I believe it was a pastor at your home church preaching a sermon previous to the overturn of Roe last year in 2022. And you were talking about how a lot of times we're not having enough conversations within our churches from the pulpit about this. Yeah. And your pastor has made a really bold statement. If I could find it, I would quote him exactly. And he said something along the lines of that he understands the pro-choice and the pro-life. And he says that he said, I'm both. Is that what he said?
Yeah.
I'm trying to find it exactly because I would love to quote him on that. Was it the very last chapter? The body of Christ. It has to be the body of Christ. See, I read it this morning on this 6 a.m. flight out of Nashville. I can find it. Yep.
He says, I asked God a rhetorical question. Would you be pro-choice or would you be pro-life? And God gave an unexpected answer. He said, both. I said, the church was packed to capacity, but you could have heard a pin drop. He goes on to say, God is the author of life. God is not the author of death. God gave man the power to choose which voices to believe and to belong and to follow. In the beginning, man chose to listen to the wrong voice, and the consequences of that choice were devastating. And when man makes the wrong choice today, the consequences are still devastating. he looked at the congregation and said, God is pro-life and God is pro-choice, but nowhere in his word do I see where God is pro-abortion. By the word of God, abortion is wrong in all cases. And then he goes on to say that God gave us the power to choose, but he says, choose life.
Mm.
And I thought that was pretty compelling and bold of him.
Mm-hmm.
Although it shouldn't be odd for a pastor to preach about this issue from the pulpit. I was looking at a recent survey, and it said something to the effect of under 10% of people who attend churches have heard a message on this topic of abortion.
Mm.
The highest number was amongst evangelicals, and it was like 20 something percent in certain strain of evangelicalism. But the point is, most people don't hear these types of messages from the pulpit.
Mm.
And again, I ask why, because this church also is a predominantly Black church. Part of the reason why I think is so many people in our churches, whether in the pews or in the pulpit, are impacted by abortion.
Mm.
Abortion is the thing that is so painful for a lot of people that we don't want to bring it up.
Mm.
Number one, we don't want to offend people. Number two, it's politicized. But number three, many of us feel a guilt and a shame that we have not yet been able to deal with through the blood of Christ.
Mm.
And so we don't talk about it. And stats say that 4 in 10 women, possibly higher than that, inside the church who attend church regularly have had abortions.
Mm.
Which I also say, well, it's probably about 4 in 10 men then who are involved with them as well. And so you have this congregation, and in the Black community, it's even higher, obviously, because of the numbers, where so many people are what we would call post-abortive. They're dealing with this in some respect. But as we walk through scripture, the issue of life, the issue of justice, the issue of love and compassion and forgiveness are all things that we should be preaching about from the pulpit. And so there are pastors, this is not to bash pastors at all.
Right.
There are plenty who are speaking about these issues, but the challenge, I think, to those who are leading a flock is to step into this ministry, I would say, especially in a post-Roe time when Roe has been overturned, especially now, because as you know, on the state level, these battles are raging, and people, especially in churches, need to be equipped with how to address the issue in their own lives and also in the lives of other people around them.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I had conversations with many people at that event that we were at talking about a post-Roe world. And really the conversations were kind of saying to the terms of like the church now has to figure out a new way to think about this, because the battle that had been fought, it's almost like the analogy you used of like football. You play your first half, you know what you're doing, you get into the locker room and like, okay, we got to redo things because we got a second half and it looks different. And I think the church is going to have to say, how do we adjust to, my particular state, the state of Texas, where abortion is illegal? Well, now what do we do with women? And you say this in a section called Keeping Up Appearances. And I think this is also one of the reasons that churches have a hard time talking about it, because they also don't know what to deal with women who are in an unexpected, unplanned pregnancy.
Yeah.
You say there's an old saying that Christians are the only army that shoot their own wounded. When it comes to the church's treatment of unwed mothers, that saying often holds true. And I was like, yes. And unfortunately, yes, that is true. And so how do you see that affecting this conversation about pro-life movement?
Yeah. It's unfortunate because we don't want to be identified with others who we look down upon. A lot of times we look at ourselves in a better light than others if we're not afflicted with the same sin. And so we can easily disassociate ourselves or point the finger and be puffed up because that's not my vice. That's not my issue. And we forget how wretched we all are. Now, that's not to say that you accept everything and you lower the standard. I think the flip side of that is opening the gateway and saying, hey, everything is okay. Do whatever you want to do. And as Paul would say, no, you don't keep sinning because grace abounds. No, it's actually the opposite. But we engage those because, again, going back to their dignity and their value, we are compelled to love them. And there are so many women who I've seen, even in, I work with an organization called Human Coalition, and we, provide direct services for pregnant women and do several other things. And there's so many who would come into churches if they didn't feel quote unquote ostracized or judged. And again, we are called to judge as believers. We're called to have a standard, but there's a way in which you do so. So your question about churches, what can churches? Number one, churches need to be speaking about this issue. They need to be educating. Number two, we need to be teaching our children when it comes to issues of sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about that too in the book, the fact that we as believers many times are taboo and don't want to talk about sex. Mm-hmm. And part of that also, Jamie, is because of our own missteps, and our own guilt when it comes to sex. But if we're not teaching our children and being honest with them about sexuality that God created and what that means and how we should operate in that, then we are doing them a tremendous disservice. I think fathers, engaging fathers, challenging fathers, is another place where we need to go. But there are so many things. 76%, and this stat always gets me. 76% of abortion-determined women say they would prefer to parent if their circumstances were different.
Mm-hmm. That's a very high number.
All we see is my body, my choice. I do what I want to do. And yes, there are some women and some men who, I was talking to a woman the other day, and her boyfriend said, I will pay you thousands of dollars to go get an abortion. That happens a lot. But there also are a lot of women who, in this new fight for life, we must engage with, because one thing here or there could save that life. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just worried about protecting the child. We need to service the mom as well. That's perhaps more important.
That's so good. And I think you mentioned this post-abortive care. And I think that's important, especially when you read the stats of 4 in 10 women in our churches. If you go to a church with 100, that's 40 people sitting in your pews that day that have been affected by abortion. That is a lot of people every single Sunday. And so I think post-abortive care as well. I have a little soapbox I'm on right now, Benjamin, and I'm trying to figure out if I need to get angry about it or not, but I'm going to tell it to you real quick. Okay.
Probably do. Yeah.
I'm not going to name this company. Okay. But we have a health sharing organization. Okay. Does that know, I'm talking about, like an insurance health sharing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh, I'm getting all sweaty pits just thinking about it, because it makes me so angry. And I understand it is a Christian organization and they have values, but in their statement of what they cover, they will not cover an unwed mother's pregnancy. And the reason that's so difficult for me is because I was pregnant twice in college. I was pregnant. I was one of those women facing an unplanned pregnancy. And I just think, because I had support, because I had family, I never had to get to this decision. And I also had 2 miscarriages. But I just think about myself at 19 and 21 and think, what if a church looked at me and said, if you were married, we could help you?
Yeah.
Or a medical sharing company said, if you were married, we could help you take care of your baby. And when you talk about 74% of women say they would have their baby, carry that baby to term if they had different circumstances. I just think that's one example that I'm really upset about these days, and I'm on a soapbox about, and I think I'm going to write an angry letter. But
write an angry op-ed and we can all retweet it.
Okay. But I don't want to lose my coverage either. And so it is things like that where I think, man, the church has got to step up. And I want to ask you this, and I think the church is a little afraid as well, because I mentioned this earlier, you mentioned it, and you talk about it in this book, and I was so happy because we talk about politics and how politics gets in the play here, and how the word pro-life, and neither one of us are sitting here saying what line of the aisle we line on or where you should line anything. But what we can all probably agree on is the word pro-life leans right. And so probably most Black Americans would lean a little bit left for reasons that we're not talking about today. And so there's some tension there. And you say in your book, the truth is there are no absolutes in this political equation. As a result, we need to extend grace to our brothers and sisters in Christ when discussing the issues they prioritize in voting. No matter which candidate we vote for, we must be mindful that there are believers on both sides of the debate and not use the ballot box as a litmus test for who is a Christian and who is not. And so I want to just talk about maybe the frustration that you have felt, or even if you have any conversation around how do we take this pro-life conversation And it's not that I am not one that says we need to pull it out of politics, because politics enforce policies and policies affect people. And we need to be voting for policies, and we need to
Yeah.
be informed in politics as believers. Yes. But I feel like guards go up when you say the word pro-life for some people. And so what are your thoughts on that?
I've waffled, honestly. I felt like, you know what? I'm not pro-life. I'm not going to call myself pro-life. I'm going to think of another term to call myself.
Yeah.
And then you realize at some point you'll have to redefine that term as well. And so do you go back and say, no, this is the essence of what this means, or do you run from it? And I've gone back and forth. I've chosen to say, no, I'm pro-life. Let me tell you what it means.
Mm.
I think you have to be prepared, though, for guards to go up. And part of that is because of the political system that we live in. But I have a good friend, you know him, his name is Justin Giboney. You probably had him on the show at some point. If not, you probably...
He's been on the show, yes.
Yeah,
You
of
got
course.
it.
You know he has. But one thing he told me about this issue, and really any issue, is that everyone needs to, whatever side you vote on, as believers, you're never going to find the whole host of the kingdom in one political party, because our
It's impossible.
our politics aren't set up that way. But what we do need
Mm-hmm.
to do as people of the cross, we need to be willing to push our party towards things that are biblically sound. And so, as it seems right now, and I'm just speaking in generalities, if we look at a Democratic Party that does not have life for preborn children and protections for preborn children on their party platform, we need to push them in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
If we're on a Republican Party who seem, and this is again, this is in general, who seems to not care or pass policies for redress or repair or correcting injustice that is historical, or for social services and a safety net that we see as being part of the scriptures when it talks about in the book of Amos and justice rolling down, or the book of James not taking advantage of your workers, or in the book of Psalms righteousness and justice, all those sorts of things, then we need to push them in that direction, because neither party has the whole swath of what it means to be a believer. And that's why it's really frustrating, and that's why it's frustrating when I hear people say you can't be a Christian if you vote for X. You can't be a believer. I don't know how a believer will vote for this person. Now, I felt that way sometimes in my humanity. Like, I can't believe that dude. How could they do that? But in actuality, we can't say that because of our political system. And I truly believe, and I talk about this a bit in the book, that from a policy standpoint, this is how we live our lives. And so we need to vote. Like, we need to look at policies that ensure human thriving, even from issues like education. We need to be involved in those sorts of things. And maybe sometimes that is outside of your party line. But you know what? There are a lot of people that think the same way. I think, Jamie, that we only hear the loudest voices on the extremes.
You're so right, Benjamin.
Like the activists on either side fill up all the airspace. But the truth of the matter is there are a lot of people that are somewhere in the middle that are a bit more reasonable. It's just that the loudest voices and sadly the biggest paychecks are on the extreme.
On both sides. Yeah, I just was doing an event in Lubbock recently at a pregnancy resource center, and just was blown away at the work they're doing, the commitment they have to the women that walk through their door. They talked about the ultrasound machines and what a difference that makes. And I just couldn't help but wonder, like, they're not sitting around having these arguments. You know what they're doing? They're going to work and serving women in their community. And they just don't have the loudest voices, because you know what? They got a job and they got a mission and they got stuff to do and they got their head down working. And so it was really, really encouraging. Benjamin, I told you that I was going to tell you how much I love this book. And I really, really think this is an important book right now for the Christian community on what it looks like to fight this fight. Because having a pro-life commitment to justice is what God calls us to. It's what he's asking of us. And so I'm just grateful that you're willing to, I don't know, if you feel like you put your neck out there, does it feel like that kind of book to you?
Yeah, a bit, but this is the thing. I feel like this is where God has me, and this is where I've been speaking over the last several years. People ask me about that, and I think that hopefully people know what to expect from me, and that uh, my heart though is justice. My heart is for historical wrongs, especially in a racialized country, and how that plays into the issue of abortion. Is for us to be able to turn off the faucet of making people, especially Black women and communities, vulnerable to this stain, this evil. And it has to be holistic. I don't believe we solve this, especially during this time after Roe. I don't believe we solve this just by pinpointing certain areas. I think that it's going to take an entirely different effort than what we've had before. But I think that we, and especially the church, understands that. And my hope is to enter into that conversation. But if you would have asked me 10 years ago while I was trying to make the Pro Bowl, like if I was going to start talking about abortion, I would have said, you got to be crazy.
Right. It's great how God directs our paths and we don't know where it's going, that's for sure. And I just want to highlight for the listener a story that you shared at the very beginning when you didn't know this was going to be what God was going to have you talking about. And it really started with your very own ultrasound of your first child. And then Kirsten saying, hey, we want other women to be able to see this. And you used your resources, what you had to do that. And there's women, if you're a Christian woman listening who's had an abortion and you have found freedom in the blood and sacrifice of Jesus, start a class in your church for post-abortive women. I promise you it'll fill up on the first day. Like there are women who would be so grateful for that. And so we all had the opportunity to do that. So congrats on this book. What's the release date?
June 20. June 20. Yep.
June 20, The New Fight for Life, Roe, Race, and a Pro-Life Commitment to Justice. Thank you so much for this book. Benjamin, here come my football questions. You ready?
I'm ready. Fire away.
You live in Atlanta. Are you a Falcons fan?
Did you read my bio at all?
Well, yeah. What does it say? I know
I played for the New Orleans Saints. Of course, I'm not a Falcons fan.
Okay, do the Saints and the Falcons have a lot of beef? I don't know NFL, honestly.
They do.
Okay.
They got a lot of beef. And so I'm the Georgia people, this might come back to haunt me if I ever run for office in Georgia, but I am not a Falcons fan. I do love the GM there because he's a friend of mine, but I'm not a Falcons fan. I mean, I played against them and I love, I'm a Who-Dat. I can't really.
Okay.
I am a Bulldog.
Here's what's funny is I don't know much about the NFL, obviously. I didn't know y'all had beef, but your Falcons just got one of our Longhorns, Bijan Robinson.
You did. That's a great pick. That is a great pick.
I was going to ask if you thought this was a good place for him to land.
Terry Fontenot is the GM there. He's a friend of mine. I was with him in New Orleans. He was assistant GM there, and he's done a lot this offseason for the Falcons, revamped the defense, and they got a lot of offensive weapons. But Bijan Robinson, so I do a little college football on the side. I work with SEC Network. And so we get to watch a little bit of Texas, but Bijan, I mean, you talk about a running back that can do it all. And the great thing is he gets to play indoors, which I'm a snob. I don't like to get dirty. I don't want to be hot. I don't want to be cold.
Oh my gosh, you're a football player.
Yeah, I ended up in New England. I had to do all those sorts of things. But when I got to the domes, and playing indoors, it's like luxury football.
Here's a question: why do all of these cold teams have outdoor fields? Is it their home field advantage?
I mean, we say that, and there is something to that once you've been out there and you practice in it. And I mean, there were times in practice in New England when it would be snowing at practice and Bill Belichick would not let us go inside. Mm-hmm. But when we get a team like the Colts come to town, I mean, there is an advantage there, but I think you should put a dome on all the stadiums, in my opinion.
I literally, one time someone was like, hey, do you want to come up to what's the Green Bay Packers? Where are they?
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, the Packers, yeah.
They're like, hey, do you want to come up here and speak and we can get you tickets? And it was like December. I was like, no, I
mean, as long as you're indoors, it'll be fine. Like, you'll only be outside for a little bit. I always say, people complain about being in cold weather places. And I say, you know what? I worked outside, though. Like, you literally got in your garage, in your car, went to work, came back. You were outside for literally 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was outside for 3.5 hours with some tights on.
With some tights on. Okay, so you guys got Bijan. He's like the favorite player I've ever watched, and I'm dying to have him on the happy hour. I was hoping to get him on before the draft, and it didn't happen. But let's talk college football. Now, you work for the SEC, and the Longhorns are heading to the SEC. Yeah. In your personal opinion, is this good? Is this bad? What is this going to do for us? Are we going to get demolished every single weekend?
I mean, let's see.
You
My
think so?
corporate answer. What's my corporate answer? So see, I'm old
What's
enough.
your on-air SEC? Someone's asking you answer, and then give me your personal. You and
Okay.
I and Kirsten and Aaron are having burgers in your
We are
backyard.
we are
Answer.
excited to welcome University of Texas and the University of Oklahoma, two great football traditions, two great fan bases. I mean, there when you think about college football, you think about Texas and Oklahoma, and to have them come into the SEC, which is the best conference, top to bottom in the nation. It is going to be an incredible opportunity for these student athletes to be seen around the country. This is going to be an exciting time in college football, something like we've never seen before. And I do
You
believe
are
that,
such a professional, Benjamin. That was your on TV professional answer.
and I do believe that to be true. Honestly, I mean, when you think about
But
Texas, University of Texas. I mean, I remember playing with Colt McCoy back in 2010. He got drafted to the Browns, and I was there. And in the offseason, we went down to UT to do some workouts. And I remember walking to the stadium. The eyes of Texas are upon you, all that stuff. And I'm like, man, that's a lot of eyes. And so
we're
I
all
think,
watching you.
yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be great. Now, when they enter the SEC, are there going to be some growing pains? I think so. Largely because of week in, week out, there's no conference as tough, I think, physically demanding in the play as the SEC. Has the conference expanded before and teams adjusted? Yes. And is Texas poised to do that? Yes. They have one of the, if not the largest recruiting base in America. They just signed Arch Manning. Yeah, Arch Manning. And so, I think Texas is going to be fine long term because of all that. I mean, they've got a pipeline that you really don't want to see if they actually get it going. As a Georgia fan, I just want them to be secondary. I want them to be good, but not as good as Georgia.
I'm happy for you guys. I love watching football so much, and I have Texas tickets, and we go to all the games, and it's going to be exciting when this transition happens because we're going to get to see teams that we haven't been able to see. I mean, Alabama was here last year.
Yeah, think about that first game of the year, the Alabama game. I mean, that was a prime time
best game I've ever been to in my entire life. First of all,
the atmosphere there was incredible.
Yeah. So it's really great. And then I was going to ask you one more question. What was it about football? I can't remember what it was, but do you watch more you work for the SEC. Are you still watching professional football on Sundays and Mondays and Thursdays?
Yeah, exactly. And Saturdays once college is over. I still do watch professional football. I don't really have a favorite team. Obviously, the teams I played for, I watch them, but I don't know as many people playing. I mean, now that Tom Brady's gone, it's like I don't really know anybody that's left. But me and the kids have like a pick 'em. So every week we fill out all the teams.
Oh, I love it.
And then last year, I went to Target, and Kirsten, when I walked in the door with all these shopping bags from Target, Kirsten gave me like that side eye, like, "What are you doing?" But I went and bought all these prizes, so every week you could win like a blender or some art stuff or some Legos, or you could win like a gift card.
That's
and I'll put the prize in the cabinet, and so we would tally the scores on like Tuesday morning after the Monday night game. And then whoever won. And my daughter kicked our butt every single time.
You've got your own fantasy football league going on at your house.
But my daughter killed us. She won
I love it.
Only 18 weeks. And she won like half of them.
I love it so much. I love it. Okay, my last question for you before we go about football. You played a lot of years in the NFL. Do you have a story or a moment or a teammate that you're like, this was one of my prize moments from spending 16 years playing football professionally?
Yes, I do. And it doesn't really have anything to do with, it has a lot to do with football. But in 2015, I was playing for the New Orleans Saints, and it was probably my best year statistically. I was a team captain, very fond memories of that year. Me and a guy named Luke McCown, who he's a Texas guy, lives in Texas. He went to La Tech. His sons he's Josh McCown's brother. They're like a quarterback family. His young sons are in Texas. You're going to hear about them.
Okay.
But he and I were kind of spiritual leaders on that team, so to speak. And at the end of the year, we had a guy who wanted to get baptized. His name was Brandon Cooks. He's a wide receiver. He's still playing, actually. And that end of that year, we baptized him and another player in the rehab pool at the facility. We asked the trainers if it was okay to get in the pool, and Brandon wanted to get baptized, and so we were like, we're going to do it. We're going to do it here. I mean, this is our church family, basically. And so he was baptized there. Other players gathered around. Some coaches peeped in and watched. And it was just one of those moments that was probably my fondest memory in the league, because
I love that.
You just see how, yeah, it's about football. Yeah, we got a job to do. We love our job. We want to get good at it. But inside every person and every man, there's a spirit man that is going to far outlive our physical man. And to see young men, have a hunger for that, that makes me even more excited than playing the game.
That's awesome. It's just this huge reminder as consumers, as the audience watching a game, whether it's on Saturday or Thursday or Sunday or Monday, that these are real people who are on the field doing a job. It is a job. Like, this is what you get in trouble. You get suspended. You get reprimanded. Exactly. You get applauded. It is a job. And I remember Pastor Gray, telling about how he got saved in the NFL by a teammate. And, it's just, and hearing Colt also talk about this ministry of like being this huge light inside of this organization. It's the same for all of us at our jobs and where we go every day and the people we interact with, that we have this opportunity. Well, Benjamin, thanks so much for your time. I do want to ask you, what are you reading these days?
What am I reading these days outside of my Bible, which I'm trying to read through the Bible again. This will be the third year.
I love it.
I was struggling. I never could do it until like 3 years ago, and I finally made it. So
once you get through those past couple of months, it's like it's
exactly.
a little bit easier.
You can see the light. I see the light. I recently read a book called Vertical Marriage by David and Wilson.
I love the Wilsons.
Yeah. So in the NFL, they were chaplains.
Yes.
And there's an organization called Pro Athlete Outreach that is a pros to pros ministry that Kirsten and I have been involved with for a long time, but they've always been a part of that. And I think this year, especially with marriage, there has been an attack on marriage in our sphere and also in our house. And it's something that we have to continually work on. And so I said, you know what? I've got this book. I'm going to try to read a marriage book a year amongst the other books that I'm reading, because it's important to keep working that muscle as well as all the others.
It totally is. And Dave and Anna are huge mentors in that and really speak a lot of truth, so pointing us back to Jesus. Well, Benjamin, thank you so much. You guys, the book, The New Fight for Life, Roe, Race, and a Pro-Life Commitment to Justice, comes out next month. You guys can get it. You can pre-order it now. Benjamin, grateful. Thank you for coming on the Happy Hour.
Thank you for having me. Can't wait till next time.